Hi, my name is Eric Olson, Director of Helps. This video is going to be titled Judgments in Compound Interest, or The Poor Just Get Poorer. I'm going to tell you a story, true story. It's kind of sad. I had someone come in several weeks ago, was not a client of Helps. First, Helps we're a law firm that represent lower income seniors and disabled persons whose debt they can't afford to pay in order to stop debt collector harassment. And as they're under federal law, if you have an attorney, collectors have to leave you alone. We also educate people how to maintain these same seniors, how to maintain their financial independence. Well, I knew this person from some other way, and her mother had passed away, and her mother had a home. And in the state where I live, they have what's called a small estate proceeding. And if a home is worth under a certain amount of value, it doesn't have to go through probate. A person can file some papers and do it themselves. And so she followed that procedure. The house was a mess, I think, and took a lot of work to get it fixed up. She put it on the market, got an offer, hired a realtor, got an offer, and then when they get the offer, one of the first things that happens is that you order title insurance. So lo and behold, they ordered title insurance and found out that back in 2010, her mother had a judgment against her. Turned out the judgment was for a debt that she owed on a credit card to Chase Bank. But Chase Bank didn't sue her, someone else did. And probably what it was a debt collector that bought the account from Chase Bank. And they sued her for the amount that she owed plus the interest rate that was on the credit card, which was 29.99%, 30% interest. And then the credit card agreement that her mom had entered into provided that Chase Bank was entitled to compound the interest. Now, what does that mean to compound the interest? You probably already know, but I'm just going to explain it. So, when you compound interest, interest gets figured at so much. You get either annual, monthly, daily. So, if interest is calculated daily, so if you had a debt for $7,000, at the end of each day, they would take that interest for that one day and they add it to the $7,000. Now the next day, they would take the $7,000 plus the interest from the day before and compound it the next day, and over and over and again. Well, if you do the math, for $7,000, that's going to turn up to about $190,000 in 11 years, 10 or 11 years. And that's exactly what happened when she found out about this judgment that she had no idea about, that her mom had. And the title company contacts the person who owned the judgment, and it was a collection company. And they had carefully followed the law. They had carefully done this. They sent her a payoff saying, hey, we're owed $190,000. Now, they were going to give her a discount because otherwise she would not receive anything at all. But that's kind of a draconian thing to happen. And, to have a debt from $7,000 and in 11 years it turns into $190,000. And because of that, this mother's daughter will get only a fraction of what she would have gotten otherwise. So it's kind of sad. And we don't see this happen a lot, but I suspect that it happens a lot more often, and it's going to happen a lot more often. There's some articles talking about the drastic increase in lawsuits being filed. So it's a thing to watch out for. If you're sued for a debt and there's a default judgment, Depending on the state you live in, there's a possibility that that judgment could come with some really high interest. Now, a lot of states have you can't do that, or they'll have a judgment set at a certain amount. But in the state where I live, there's no such thing. And it's too bad, but there should be a law to prevent that from happening. Just not right. We really, a judgment is good for so many years. It depends on the state law. Sometimes the judgment's good for 5 years. Often it's good for 10 years, but often it can be renewed for another 10 years. And that's what happened in this instance. The judgment was carefully renewed before it expired. So it was good when she went to sell the property. Now, in some states, there's a homestead exemption that protects amount of equity where the mom could have filed a bankruptcy and wiped out the debt. In this state, it's possible she could have done that when she first got the judgment. But when she passed away, there's no longer a homestead exemption, so even a basic amount of the homestead exemption for that state, the kids can't take advantage of because that isn't their home. They're getting that through an inheritance. So there's no homestead exemption they could claim on. So it's something to be aware of if there's a judgment, what's the interest that's attached to the judgment? And is it compounded? Because that could have a dramatic effect on how much your kids get out of the property, or how much you get if you go to sell it before you die. It's not the practice of judgment creditors for credit cards to try to execute or take a person's home if they have equity, if there's equity over and above the homestead exemption. You kind of see why in this case. They were getting 30% interest, compounded. And they knew eventually this lady was going to die, and they were going to make out like bandits. So that's why I call this video "The Poor Get Poorer." Some states don't allow this to happen. They prevent this from happening. In fact, the state where I live in, they changed the law, but the law didn't change till 2015. And it's too late. This judgment was in 2010, so this new law didn't apply. Hopefully his helps gets bigger, and we will be big someday. We'll lobby for some legislation in different states where this is a problem to have the laws changed. I no problem with creditors getting interest on judgments, but this was ridiculous. 30% compounded daily. It just smacks as being totally unfair for a regular credit card. So something to be aware of. My name's Eric Olson. If you're a senior and you have debt you can't afford to pay, collectors can't take your Social Security, they can't take your pension. That money's protected. There's provisions for it to be protected in your bank account. And we represent seniors who can't afford their debt, so they don't have to deal with debt collectors anymore. And we also educate them how to maintain their financial independence, what they can do. So if you like this video, please consider subscribing to our channel. And you have a great day. Subscribe there.